Mr. Chairman, we're live.
Matt, thank you. So members, welcome to House Corporations. We will have 3 bills on our agenda. It'll be in this order: Senate File 51 engrossed, Senate File 52, Senate File 50 engrossed, and then Senate File 59. So 4 bills, my apologies. And so we'll start with Senate File 51 engrossed, but before we start, please, Matt, call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Brown,
Present.
Representative Locke, excused. Representative Heft, Representative Johnson,
Here.
Representative Lucas,
Here.
Representative Webb,
Here.
Representative Weber,
Here.
Chairman Yin,
Here.
and Representative Knapp.
Excused.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so with that, we have Senate File 51 engrossed. Do we have someone to present the bill? Okay, please, come present the bill. It sounds like we don't have any senators to come do it, but that's okay. This is a Corporations Committee bill, if I do recall, is. And so we have the stakeholders in the room, and please introduce yourselves and tell us what we need to know. Thank you. Whichever order makes sense for you guys.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here on behalf of Charter and Verizon. Jody Levin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jason Hendricks with Range. We're a communications provider in a number of places throughout the state.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dave Pickard. Today I'm here representing Lumen, also known as CenturyLink.
Please proceed. Thank you, gentlemen.
Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with you, with new members of the committee, I'd kind of like to go through the background of the bill and the reason for the act and how we got to this point following the interim, and then get into the actual page-by-page presentation of the bill.
Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate File 51 is a Corporations Committee bill. It was the subject of interim discussions last year. Lots of meetings among the stakeholders, and those stakeholders were the Wyoming Public Service Commission, the Wyoming Office of Consumer Advocate, the Wyoming Telecommunications Association, various competitive providers, wireless providers, AARP, and Farm Bureau. So we had lots of meetings just about every week or every other week in some cases throughout the summer, working on coming up with changes to the Telecom Act. So a little bit of a background on the Telecom Act. Take you back in time to 1995 when telecommunications was regulated just like the electric industry, in the sense that companies filed for rate of return. There's implicit subsidies in the rate, but there's a general duty to serve everyone with rates controlled, but no competition. So in 1995, there was a Wyoming Telecommunications Act that opened up the industry to competition. And as part of that, new entrants were allowed in. But there's a recognition that there are a lot of places in the state that are high cost, sparsely populated, difficult to serve, that competitors weren't going to be serving those anytime soon. And so a universal service fund was established, and that's a surcharge that's assessed on providers of telecommunication service in order to keep service available everywhere and rates affordable. For those who didn't get the benefit of competition, they could at least get the benefit of having affordable rates and service that was available. Over time, the act has changed and been updated a number of times. There's always been a sunset provision in the act to allow for review every few years or so. And so it's been updated just about every time, at least a little bit, as technology has changed. And so where we are at this point is that without a further extension of the act, of the sunset date, the act would go away. And all of us involved in this process have various things that we about the bill or don't like about the act, or, things that we prefer to other things. But one thing that we can all agree on is that primacy is incredibly important. So if we lose our primacy in Wyoming, this act goes away and it goes to the federal government, then all disputes and complaints and so forth that we have would have to be handled by the federal government, the FCC in particular, the Federal Communications Commission. And that's burdensome on Wyoming citizens, it causes a lot of delay. And so we would just rather have the act in Wyoming and have our Public Service Commission be the entity that we go to. So that was the reason for the review of the act at this time. So I'm going to go through a summary of the changes again before I get into the page by page of the bill. One thing that it does is it extends the sunset date to July 1st, 2031, so a 6-year extension. So this would get us further down the line of trying to get competition everywhere and then reduce the areas that are in still need of universal service programs. It modernizes the act. It removes obsolete provisions. It clarifies what's regulated and supported by the Universal Service Fund, and that's specifically local voice service in areas that aren't competitive. And then there's also clarification on what's not regulated and therefore not supported by the Universal Service Program, and that's pretty much any other communication service. So what we're left with for regulation is just local service. So that's your ability to really just call your neighbors, the town. Anything beyond that is considered long distance. So to call across the state would be long distance. That's not regulated, not supported by the fund. Wireless service won't be part of that. Any broadband service. So this is just the last little bit, just so that people can stay connected to the world, still have access to 911 because they don't have all competitive alternatives with other technology. There's also an addition of broadband internet access service to the services that government entities can provide only within certain limitations, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail later, but just mark that up as something that we'll be addressing on that limitation on broadband. There were a couple changes that were made in the Senate, some amendments. There's no longer I'm sorry. There originally in the bill, there was something that would allow for assessments on prepaid wireless carriers for contributions into the fund, but that was going to be problematic and potentially costly with a fiscal note for a system to implement that. There are some concerns about if that part is viewed as a tax, that starting a bill in the Senate for a tax bill is not allowed, and therefore that would be problematic. So that provision was taken out, and I think everyone is okay with the removal of that provision. There was also a change that was made that universal service can only support one line per location. Taking you back to technology, back when the internet first started, when you have to have dial-up internet and people were starting to get second lines in order to do that, so they could keep their phone line freed up while you're on the internet. Well, over time, that technology has changed. You don't have nearly as many second lines. There are some situations with multi-lines, mostly for business. Residential, it's not as big of a deal as it used to be. So changing that was something that was a policy call the Senate wanted to make, and the result of that would be a reduction in the Universal Service Fund. They also increased the local rate benchmark, where anyone who has a tariffed rate for services above that benchmark, in this case now $35, Universal Service makes up for the difference. It was 30. It's now under the change with the Senate, 35. What that means is that customers will be paying the higher rate, and then Universal Service will go down. So between all of these changes that we're talking about, again, Universal Service is reducing down over time in recognition of more competition and other services that are coming in. So that's where we are. I wanted to also go through some of the important things that we're not changing. So this bill is, a pretty big bill. But there's a whole lot of things that are still in the act that we didn't touch or aren't proposing changes for. One was what I already touched on before, the primacy. We're retaining the primacy of Wyoming to deal with these issues rather than having the federal government deal with that. That stays the same. The pro-competition policies in the act are still there. The pro-industry policies, which limit government competition, are still in there. Various consumer protection provisions, including quality of service requirements, notice requirements to customers, prohibitions on changing services without customer authorization, and then commission review of complaints. All that's still in the act. Prohibitions on discriminatory and anti-competitive behavior would still be in there. Caps on retail phone rates and wholesale switched access rates, still in there. And then arbitration of company-to-company disputes, and then universal service funds, and then state reviews of the federal universal service fund, which is what we're kind of complementing. All that's still in the act. We didn't touch it, but we did do a whole lot of modernization as part of this proposal and what's in the bill. And with that, I think I'll go through page by page of the bill, if you're ready for that, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hendricks, thank you. Well, we have a question, so we'll let him ask a question and then we'll let you continue.
Explain to me the service fund. I don't quite understand what that encompasses.
Sure.
Mr. Hendricks, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Johnson, the Universal Service Fund was set up originally because there wasn't going to be competition everywhere. So when the state decided to open up the industry to competition, let other people in, because it used to be a regulated monopoly just like electricity, they brought people in. They're going to, typically the competitors are going to go after the lowest cost areas first. So there was concern that the high cost rural areas were going to be left behind without this kind of a support mechanism. So this is not something that comes out of the general fund. It's a surcharge on phone bills related to intrastate retail revenue. So anyone who reports intrastate retail revenue, any provider pays into the fund. Competitors and incumbents alike pay into the fund in order for a customer to benefit by having their rates stay at an affordable level. Because if you just simply opened everything up to competition, either areas wouldn't be served at all, or they would be served at incredibly high rates because of the high cost of service. So this is rather than a tax, I mean, think of it more as a user fee, that to be part of the network, everyone benefits through universal service because you're able to contact anyone. Anyone can contact anyone else. They can access 911 and other services. So that just simply keeps people connected. And but as competition has come in and new technologies have come in, the number of areas that are supported has decreased over time.
Any follow-up? Nope. Okay, so Mr. Hendricks, thank you. So members, again, this is one of those bills where it has a sunset date on it just so we can overlook the policy every few years, and especially in an area where technology changes, one like telecommunications, as well as federal laws change and we have to align. This is why we have this bill before us. And so Mr. Hendricks, please.
Okay, thank you. We'll start off on page 2. Page 2 has the change in the sunset date from 2025 to 2031. Going on to page 3, and I'm sorry, I'll back up. Bottom of page 2 into page 3 and 4. What's going on here is that essential services under the act as it is now is defined as has 4 different things plus switched access service. And I mentioned that term before. Switched access service is what long distance companies pay to local companies in order to connect services into the long distance world. So essential was defined as both local service and then access so that long distance companies can provide their services, long distance services. So what you'll see on page 23 when we get to it, there's a repealer that takes out 4 of the components. And those 4 components are now under the definition of local exchange service. And so that was a cleanup for reasons later on in the act on consistencies and terms. That's just a cleanup. It doesn't really change a whole lot. And so essential services is now defined as switched access and local exchange service. And now we have the definition of local exchange service, which has been updated and modernized. So that's the reason for those changes. And just, along those lines, as we get into the bill and on consistency in terms, because this act is now 30 years old and it's been modified over time, some of the terms aren't quite consistent. And so part of this cleanup is to make sure that we're using consistent terms throughout. And so that's the rationale for some of the changes in the definitions. Non-competitive, the non-competitive essential service definition on page 4, line 11, just making sure that we're using the term essential there. On part 14, lines 17 to 19, making sure that we're using local exchange in that section because it's important later on in the act for that specifically universal service is only supporting local exchange service. There's a definition here of broadband that Ms. Levin is gonna address this definition, if that's okay, when you address 413.
I can address it now, Mr. Chairman, if you want, or I can wait until we're into that section of the bill and address it then.
Ms. Levin, we can wait until get
Very
it done
good.
all at once.
So keep that definition in mind. So when we get into section 413 later, Ms. Levin will talk about the reason for those additions and then point to this definition for that. Again, on page 5, lines 7 through 10, just wanted to make sure that this term is defined because it was in here but wasn't defined. Just want to make sure that's clarified. All right, section 104 is where we get into what I touched on in the summary. The way that the statute reads right now, it defines telecommunications service, and it's an incredibly broad definition. And 104 says telecommunications is regulated, except for telecommunications doesn't include this, that, and the other thing. There's a big, long list of things that's not telecommunications. Some of those services just simply aren't around anymore. They're obsolete. But really what we were trying to do with this is rather than having something broadly defined and then say what it's not and leave something left, we'd rather just change it so that this is clearly what is regulated, and that would be non-essential telecommunications services, which is the definition back a couple pages. Essential services that haven't been defined as competitive, and essential services are local and switched access. So those are the only things that are regulated. And then the additional changes on 19 through 22 still talk about obligations of all telecommunications carriers to do certain things in compliance with the act that they do currently today. Just wanted to make it clear going forward because of how we restructured this, that they still have those obligations going forward too. And then as part of that long list of services that I was talking about that were taken out, we did still want to keep 2 of them just because we wanted to be very clear that those services aren't regulated because it could be a little bit uncertain whether or not. So we just wanted to keep 2 of those still in there. One is wireless services, and that's mostly the same as the current act, but there were a couple changes in here for consistency purposes. And then going on to page 7, private telecommunication services also would not be regulated. That's current language, but because of the way that it was moved, again, there'll be a repealer where we can talk about that later. But because the way that it was moved, it shows up as new language, but that's actually existing terminology. Shifting over to page 8, here's your determination of competitive services. So there's various ways that a service can be deemed competitive. and therefore no longer regulated, no longer eligible for universal service. This first change on lines 14 through 15, this allows for a company to have some of their locations deemed to be competitive. So traditionally, for a smaller rural company, if somebody wanted to declare an area competitive, it would be the entire company typically would be declared competitive. This allows for a subset of that. So somebody could come in and say, no, we serve these areas, that's competitive. You shouldn't be eligible for universal service support anymore for those. And so that's what this clarifies, is that those would be deemed to be competitive at the sub-company level and not eligible for universal service support. But then any of the remaining locations that aren't competitive still would be. So that's the rationale here. So again, if you go through the current act, and some of this is touched on within this bill, there are lots of ways that something can be declared competitive. The rest of the changes on page 9, those are just consistency and terminology changes. Page 10 in section 203, same thing, consistency in terms. Section 204 on page 10 to 12. Those are modernizing the price schedules that we provide to the commission, or tariffs. If you look at an electric company, an electric company's tariff, they can be pretty big, very legalese, long, robust, not very conducive for a customer necessarily to look in and see what's going on. And we still have remnants of that within our industry as well. And so this would clean that up, modernize it, allow for companies to post their rates, terms, and conditions electronically online. We would no longer have to do a paper copy with the commission. We would file that electronically. But we also have that clarification on page 11, lines 8 through 11, to make sure that customers still get notice in case there's any changes in rates. They could still get notice of those changes in the same format that they get their current bills in. So if they get an electronic bill, they would get electronic notice that things changed. They could file a complaint or concern with the commission. Or if they get paper, they would get a paper copy. And so that's what that does. Going on to page 12, in 404, that's consistency in terms. Page 13, those changes there that are in the remnants or in the rest of 404, those are just clarifications on current duties that the commission has, that the FCC has delegated to the state, just clarifying that the commission has those duties. But these are things that they do today, but as we're modernizing the act, we just wanted to make sure that those are clearly laid out, that they have that authority. Complaint about prices in section 405, that's consistency in terms. On to page 14, quality of service, that's being consistent. If you look back on page 13 and 405, we're making sure that we're consistent between these two sections, that between complaints about prices and quality of service requirements, that those apply to what's regulated, which we've talked about before, which is just non-competitive essential telecommunications service, local and switched access. So now getting into 413, this is where we get into the stuff about broadband, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Levin.
Thank
Please,
you,
Ms.
Mr.
Levin. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 3715-413 is a good example of how a situation arose over time and industry brought a fix to the legislature, or essentially asked the legislature to make a determination. So in the early 2000s, we started seeing instances of municipalities entering into exclusive agreements with one provider for service, effectively shutting out the rest of the industry. It's very hard for industry to compete with government. So industry brought a bill to the legislature and said, would you please put some clarifications on the ability for government to compete with the private sector? So not saying that you can't do it, but at least give industry the opportunity to provide service first. So that's the limitation on the authority of political subdivisions. We include in this section now the definition of what we call BIAS, Broadband Internet Access Service. This entire act is a voice-based act. So why are we bringing in a broadband definition? We have seen significant funds already come into Wyoming. We're going to see more funds come into Wyoming for the federal government to provide broadband service. In some of those Treasury guidance rules, it actually encourages municipalities to establish their own broadband networks. That's very inconsistent with how Wyoming has treated industry. Wyoming has taken a kind of a pro-competition, pro-industry stance. And so broadband internet, the infrastructure can be used to provide voice service. So we're trying to update this section to also say a municipality, a political subdivision, they may want to become their own provider. Please give industry the opportunity to vie for that service first. If over time, or we get the RFP and we determine we can't provide that service, then the political subdivision can move forward. So not an outright prohibition, but a limitation that takes the stance of we're gonna believe in industry. We're gonna believe in industry's ability to provide service first. If not, then a municipality can proceed. So that's why we're bringing in this definition, because we are seeing these federal funds come in that do give a preference for government competition, essentially. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Hendricks, are you continuing? Please.
Continuing on page 19, section 501, this is the Universal Service Fund section. That first change there on page 15 is just conforming changes. Page 20 is where we get into the first or one of the Senate amendments. This is the one where it limits support to one line per customer or household. So that limits the fund and who can receive it. Then there's another conforming change. Page 21, conforming change. And then page 22 is where the Senate changed it from 30 to 35. Again, that would lead to customers paying higher rates, but Universal Service Fund going down. And then a few more conforming changes. And then on to page 23, there are some other conforming changes in here. And specifically, the definition of supported service, you'll see in a repealer, was removed from the act. And so because of the removal, there's another terminology used in those two locations. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the end of the changes in the bill. But as we were going through this morning in preparation for this meeting, noticed that there were some other amendments that probably need to be made because of the changes that the Senate made. There were some things that weren't taken out with their deletions that should be taken out of the bill. Specifically, section 3, page 23, lines 21 to 23. This is referring to something that was removed by the Senate on the prepaid wireless. There was a section on prepaid wireless that allowed the department to do certain things. Since that section was taken out, this section should probably be taken out too. So I'd recommend a deletion of section 3. Section 4A on page 24, same thing. It's the reason why there was a different effective date is because of the prepaid wireless section, and with that being removed and section 3 being removed, really what section 4 should probably end up being is just simply it'd be a section 3 now. So instead of section 4, it'd be section 3, and it would just say this act is effective July 1st, 2025. So deleting of A, modifying B, so that what's left is this act is effective July 1st, 2025. And I think that would allow for conforming to the Senate changes, and we'll be good to go. So that's all I have, but we stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. Any questions for the presenters? Representative Webb?
I have one, and maybe you will or will not know it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that is, was there any discussion as to why the $5 raise from $30 to $35 in the Senate?
Mr. Hendricks?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Webb, I believe that the concept is that it's been a number of years since $30 was set, and that with price inflation and everything else going up, that this should be adjusted as well. And so there's the way that $30 came about originally, just for a little bit of a background. It used to be that number floated. And so every year the commission would determine what the statewide average local rate was. So every provider, competitive and incumbent, would send in their information on their local rates. The commission would calculate what the average was and then set the benchmark at 130% of that. So customers weren't paying the average, they were paying 130%. So recognizing that there's higher cost in rural areas and that they would pay at least more than what an urban customer would pay. So that was the rationale for it. But it was noticed that year after year, the rates were just right around $30. It'd be a little less than $30. The average rate, or the benchmark rate after you did those calculations, was a little bit less than 30, a little bit more than 30, but it was always right around 30. So in 2015, the legislature fixed that at 30 and then added other provisions that it'll be 30, but if the commission determines that the benchmark calculation would result in numbers that are 10% different from that, more or less, then it could set a different rate. So that other language is still in there. It's set at 35 based on an assumption that that the costs have gone up and the rate should go up as well.
Representative Webb, any follow-up?
If I could, one more, just want
Please.
to make sure the suggested amendment would be to delete section 3 on page 23 completely, renumber section 4 to section 3, delete section A, and just leave section B, but renumber it or rename it to A. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
Representative Webb, I think the only other change is that you'd strike sections 1 and 2 of, so it would read in section 4, now section 3, it would be this act is effective July 1st, 2025. Is that correct, Mr. Hendricks?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman, and so the R would have to change to an is as well.
Yeah, so the goal of the amendment is just to no longer deal with the prepaid wireless stuff. It's just some conforming stuff that was required if we were going to put the service charge on the prepaid wireless, which was taken out by the Senate. Is there any other follow-up? Representative Lucas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much for all of this information. I have a couple of questions. Was the preceding sunset before 2025, 2023?
Mr. Hendricks, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas, that is correct. There was we did have a 2-year extension from 2023 to 2025.
And now, oh, sorry,
Representative
Mr.
Lucas,
Chairman.
please, follow up.
Thank you, sir. Get a little hyper here. And so now you're asking for a 6-year extension on so it'll be a 4-year extension on what has been a 2-year sunset. What was the thinking on that?
Mr. Hendricks?
Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Levin can add to this if you would like, but it's kind of changed over time. So it's not always been a standard, we'll set it 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. It kind of varies. I recall, if I'm correct, I think when it was set in 2015, when we did that revision, I think that's when it was set at 2023. And then we were going to make changes, or we started this process a couple years ago, weren't able to complete it. And so in 2023, it was just added for 2 years to give us a couple extra years because of various changes going on the federal side. There was a lot of uncertainty. So at that time, it was just a 2-year extension, just to give us a little bit more time to talk to see how things worked out on the federal side. So now with a 6-year, I guess we're back to where we were kind of in 2015 when we did a 6-year extension.
Ms. Levin, anything to add?
8 years, was that 8 years?
Mr. Chairman, I think my colleague addressed it.
Representative Lucas, any follow-up? Sure, please, Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I let my fingers do the walking sometimes on this, and the universal assessment rate, do you know how much does that come to for the folks that have to kick in on that? I'm just curious.
Mr. Hendricks?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas, the Public Service Commission is here and will follow us, and they can give you the exact number. And so I can give you a ballpark, but I think it's better if you just got the real number from them.
Any other questions?
No, thank you, sir.
Representative Brown, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go back to page 8, determination of competitive services. Is there anything now in the state, in your areas, where that's taking place? Or is there any thing that looks like it's going to be taking place in the near future?
Mr. Hendricks?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, if I understand your question, you're talking about changes in technology or offerings from various providers and whether that's leading to more competition. Yeah, it's continually evolving. In our areas range, we've seen lots of competition over time, and so that's modified things. Now, as far as elimination of universal service, there's Mr. Pickard, if he would like to give a background. Don't mean to throw you under the bus, I guess, but his client went through a big competitive reclassification proceeding a number of years ago, and as a result of that is no longer a recipient in universal service in most of its locations.
Mr. Pickard, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, Mr. Hendricks is correct. CenturyLink was the monopoly incumbent for many, many years, all the way going back prior to AT&T when it was all called Ma Bell. I think in front of you, you have a history of the Telecom Act in Wyoming. One of the previous acts then allowed for companies like CenturyLink or US West or Quest at the time to come in and ask for regulatory relief. And they did such in many of their markets. When you look at, and let's specifically use the city of Cheyenne. City of Cheyenne, we're the incumbent local exchange provider. Now you have voice competition among wireless, among cable VoIP telephony, a variety of other companies that were able to come in and look at this market and became competitive. Once it was competitive, we went ahead and filed with the Public Service Commission under the existing and previous acts in order to get that regulatory relief in those areas. What you have in front of you is not much of a change to that, but I would draw your attention to, in our opinion, the importance of having the word location now described in the act, so that instead of, as Mr. Hendricks referenced, instead of having companies come in and ask for regulatory relief, not rate relief, but regulatory relief company-wide, they do it on locations. There's clearly, as technology is improving and expanding and new entrants are in the marketplace, your former incumbent companies are very much subject to competition coming in, whether it be from satellite, whether it be from fixed wireless through or cable, or a variety of even wireline competitors. So that's kind of the history there.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the presenters? Well, thank you. So, I mean, I think the one thing that I want to just make clear for the members, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that all of this is still governed by the Public Service Commission to determine what is or is not competitive, to make sure that payers in that area get the Universal Service Fund or not. That's correct. Ms. Levin, please.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, one of the things that you don't see in the bill, because we didn't change it within statute, is 3715-401, and that's the commission powers. So we retained all of the commission's powers, and so that would include the situation you just addressed. Importantly, Mr. Hendricks hit on this already, but it's also the express delegation of authority from the federal act to the state act. So if this act were to go away, telecom regulation doesn't completely go away. It just means that we're now at the whim of the federal government, and those, as Mr. Hendricks indicated, any disputes, complaints have to be addressed federally. We don't believe that's in the best interest of Wyoming. It's not in the best interest of customers and companies. So that express delegation remains in the act. The PSC is able to address that, including the situation on reviewing terms, conditions, rates.
Great, thank you. Representative Lucas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you please repeat that statute reference?
Ms. Levin?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas, the section is 3715-401,
Thank you.
commission powers.
Any other questions for our presenters? If not, I will let you guys off the hot seat. So any state agencies, government entities, Public Service Commission, I think it makes sense for you guys to come up first. Thank you. Please introduce yourselves and tell us what we need to know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris Petrie. I'm Deputy Chairman at the Wyoming Public Service Commission. With me at the table is John Burbridge, our Chief Counsel, and Commissioner Robinson is in the cheap seats. You've received a very straightforward and thorough explanation about the evolution of the act, the reason that this effort was undertaken, and the process by which this bill was produced. There's a lot of effort behind this, and the Wyoming Telecommunications Act that started off in 1995 on the heels of the breakup of the Bell system was definitely due for a cleanup. There was a lot of room for improvement after it had been put through a number of iterations, amendments over the years as changes occurred in the industry. It's a rather fast-moving industry, perhaps compared to other types of utilities, and it had a commensurate number of major changes over the years. And a lot of what's done here is that kind of housekeeping, cleanup, and modernization, as was stated. We understand our role, which actually isn't changing a great deal because of this bill, and we do appreciate the more straightforward approach to explaining what the system of regulation for telecommunications services is in Wyoming that is provided by this revised Telecommunications Act. I understand the amendments suggested by Mr. Hendricks. Those appear to be exactly what he said. Those seem very sensible, and we were involved all along the way as the work was done on this bill. The working group included the Public Service Commission, and this is a step in the right direction as far as modernizing and eliminating the uncertainty and ambiguities that were kind of built into the structure of the act as it was amended over time. And we don't have a whole lot more to say about this. You've heard quite a bit. I'm certainly available to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Mr. Petrie, you heard the question from Representative Lucas, I hope, on the amount gathered. Do you have those numbers?
Mr. Chairman, I do have those numbers in a couple of formats even. The assessment rate for fiscal year 2025 is at 1.9%. That's designed to generate just under $2 million with the change of the benchmark, that rate would be less. And so while I was sitting in the gallery, I was able to look at my own Verizon bill, which comes to a total of $109.34. And the Wyoming Universal Service Fund assessment there was 7 cents. And the Federal Universal Service Fund assessment is 51 cents. So that's the kind of scale of surcharge.
I'm going to pass off chairmanship to Representative Webb, and I will be back after I present my bill. Representative Webb.
Are you, any follow-up question? Go ahead, Representative Weber.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I have a question I noticed on some of the regulations that you hold hearings for complaints. Did you guys hold any hearings for the public to put any input on any of the rate increases?
Sir, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, Representative Weber, we have not had many telecommunications rate cases for years and years. I think that possibly the most recent one that was just a rate case was Chugwater Telecom, and I think that was 10 or 12 years ago. And so when we do have a rate case for any type of utility, we certainly do publish notice. We hold public notice hearings when it's a case of significant interest, and even to the extent that we'll go out into different parts of the state so that it's easier for people to do it. We have you can also participate in those hearings by video conference. And so we certainly do. Whenever there's a rate change on the table that the commission is to judge and rule on, there is definitely an opportunity for public comment in a hearing context and also in writing. So when we publish notices, it calls for comments, intervention, protest, and so forth.
So on you mentioned the Chugwater case. What year was that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weber, I believe that was about 10 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any further comments from either one of you? Thank you for your
Nothing
time
further,
today.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, appreciate it. Are there any other elected officials or state agencies that want to testify? Okay, if not, are there any people from the public that are not lobbyists that would like to testify? And then any lobbyists that would like to testify? Go ahead and identify yourselves, and then, well, go ahead, Mr. Moline first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I was part of the working group, and I want to say my thanks to the other folks that were on there for inviting Farm Bureau to the table. Probably the most important aspect of this bill is, for my members, is the Universal Service Fund. We, as in society, made a decision many, many years ago that we want people to be able to have a good, reliable landline. And this is how we decided as a society we would pay for it, is through the universal service funds. And this is important to a lot of my members. This is designed for the people essentially at the head of the creek that are long ways from anywhere, don't have reliable cell phone service. As I said, we've made a decision that it's important to have a reliable landline. And so that's, the universal service fund is important to my members. Just making this bill important to my members. Another aspect that's important, it fits with my Farm Bureau policy, is having local control. By having this act, it's ran through the state of Wyoming, rather than being back in the federal hands a long ways away. This has worked very well in the past. I think, having this act go forward will keep this working quite well. As far as the fee, being from a farm organization, we don't really appreciate the increase, but we recognize that things cost more. So accepting a $5 fee, and if I heard right, that's been in there since 2013. So for quite a while, so appreciate the reason for it. If it's not what we want, but we're willing to accept it to keep the act. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would take any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Weber?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Moline. It seems to me like the part of the area that you're representing is a lot of rural area, and I can understand their comments on landlines. Has any of the people that you represent, have they also talked about satellite services coming in and how that would affect their landline, if it would?
Mr. Moline?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weber, how to phrase this. In my lifetime, we've seen a tremendous advance in technology. Where are the areas that it hits last is in the very rural areas. Eventually, it'll probably get there. It's there now, but it's just not affordable. The cost would be tremendously higher. So that's why we appreciate this universal service fund, everybody helping out the people in the very remote areas to help them have a reliable phone line.
Any other questions for Mr. Moline? Thank you.
Thank you.
You please introduce yourself, and people may know you, but I don't, so.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Chris Mickey. I'm from the Wyoming Business Alliance. The Wyoming Business Alliance represents business entities from all over the state in all different industries, including the telecom industry. And I wanted to echo my colleagues' sentiment when we say thank you to the working group and members of the different stakeholders that have worked on this. The product you have before you is the product of a lot of hard work and good work and well thought out ideas. And so I just wanted to show our support for this bill, and I'll be brief because you heard a lot of great testimony already. So I'd take any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Mickey. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else in the room that wishes to testify on this? Okay, we will close public comment. Oh, do you have anybody on Zoom, Matt?
Mr. Chairman, we do not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, what is your pleasure? Move the bill?
Let's try and get that in harmony.
Lucas and Weber, okay? Discussion? Anything as far as amendments? We have the one amendment that was recommended, so. So somebody want to make a motion on that?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move the amendment that was suggested by the folks that are doing this.
Okay, a second on that?
Second.
Okay, and just to, as far as I'm concerned, repeat that we were going to delete section 3 on page 23. And then section 4 would be renumbered to section 3. And we're gonna delete all of paragraph A. And then we will, what's that? Lines 4 through 7, paragraph A, lines 4 through 7. And then we will renumber subsection B to A. We will also delete the words section 1 and 2 of, and then we probably need to delete the word are and just this act effective, or is, maybe replace it with is. This act is effective July 1st, 2025.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion with the amendment? Okay, those in favor of making this amendment change, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those not in favor, say no. Okay. Any further discussion on the bill itself?
Question.
Okay. Matt, will you please do the roll call vote, please?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on Senate File 51, Wyoming Telecommunications Act revisions. Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Heft.
Aye.
Representative Johnson,
Aye.
Representative Lucas.
Aye.
Representative Weber,
Aye.
and I have absentee votes for Representative Locke. He voted aye. Representative Yin voted aye. Representative Knapp voted aye. Chairman Webb.
Aye.
Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
Okay, thank you very much. The next bill that we will consider is Senate File 50, and Insurance Holding Company Regulations Amendments. 52. Is it 52?
Are we doing 50?
My screen went off. Hold on just a minute, please.
Whatever he says, we'll do.
Yeah, 52, I'm sorry, my mistake, so. I've never made a mistake in my life, so.
Of course not.
52, insurance amendments. You two are here to present it, I presume?
Mr. Chairman, yes, my name is Jeff Root. I'm the Insurance Commissioner, and with me is my deputy, Tana Howard, and she will address Senate File 52.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Tana Howard. I'm the Deputy Insurance Commissioner, and I am bringing you Senate File 52, Insurance Amendments. This committee has seen several, what the Department of Insurance calls cleanup bills. We have a running list every couple of years of just things we need to clean up within our code, which is Title 26. These are things that have been brought to us by the insurance industry, companies or agents, or also our internal staff of how to make things better within our department. So this is just a summary of these changes, and I'm going to take you through these, okay? Our first change starts on page 2, and it is clarifying the definition of an insurance transaction. We are not changing the definition of insurance transaction in our code. We're just clarifying. We technically have 2 definitions within our code that refer to an insurance transaction. One is actually, as it's listed here, insurance transaction, and the other is transact. We get several questions from insurance companies about what is an insurance transaction, when should it be applied? For example, we have a reference in our code in Chapter 9 of, which is licensing agents in our code. And we say you cannot serve as an insurance agent and a consultant in the same insurance transaction. It's to protect consumers, right? So a consultant isn't giving advice and collecting premium, right? And selling a policy. It's an ethical issue. So sometimes we get a question about, well, what is an insurance transaction? What does that mean? And what we're doing in this is just clarifying what an insurance transaction is. Again, it's not changing the definition, it's just rearranging a little bit within the code. So insurance transaction here, as it's related, applies to an insurance service organization. And those insurance or service organizations or support organizations, excuse me, are organizations such as help insurance companies underwrite business, right? They might run a claims report or give information on a property, a driving report, things like that. That's not the intent for insurance transaction when a company asks the definition between what's an insurance transaction. What we're referring to is transact. They're transacting insurance. And that definition is already within our code. It's in that 26.1.102 and it's XXX. And that talks about solicitation or negotiating, carrying out an insurance contract or transacting any type of insurance. Again, that definition is already in there. We're just clarifying it. And so by adding this subset that's of B on page 3, that's what that means. Moving on to the middle of page 3, you're going to see this a lot, and this is what makes the bill long, is striking out this term original. Currently, as you're probably aware, we license insurance companies. When we license an insurance company, we give them a certificate of authority, otherwise known as a license, but we call it a certificate of authority. Right now, we give them a hard copy of a certificate of authority to do business in our state. What this is removing is that original, so we don't have to send them a hard copy of a license. We've done this in other places in our code of removing this hard copy requirement, and we're just updating the last piece, which is just insurance companies, this original certificate to insurance companies. Insurance companies can be verified online. You can call us anytime. Everything is out there. There's no insurance company that's saying, show me your certificate of, or consumer that's saying, show me your certificate of authority to do business in this state. Because, you know, the companies that may do business here are probably not located here. And this document is housed in a home office many states away. And so it's just not logical. This is just updating with the times to remove this original certificate requirement. And that, again, is in the middle of page 3. And it goes on into the top of page 4. And then again in the middle of page 4. Again, these are both just striking out original. We're still licensing insurance companies the same way. We're just not sending them a hard copy of their license. And these insurance companies are actually required to keep that document, and it's technically property of the insurance department. So if they ever make a change to their license, they change their address, change their name, merge with another insurance company, they have to physically mail that original certificate of authority back to us. Now, many companies in our state have been doing business for over 30, 40 years. I bet you can guess they probably don't have that original certificate of authority with them. So that just creates more paperwork. They have to fill out another couple pages of documents saying they lost it and this is how they lost it. So again, it's an efficiency thing. Nothing is changing with how we license insurance companies. We're just not sending that physical copy. The next change we have is on page 5, and we're adding a subset E here to 26.3.113. And what this change is it's requiring insurance companies to update their contact information. Seems pretty logical. We get consumer complaints from your constituents about insurance companies. Maybe a claim isn't being paid, maybe they have an issue communicating. And what we do is we reach out to the insurance company. Without this information being updated, we're having some trouble getting the right person at an insurance company, which holds up your constituent complaints for us to resolve. We just want them to update their information. Every other license in our entire code, our agents, agencies, any other type of license have to update their information. For some reason, we just haven't updated insurance companies, and that's why we're trying to update that to make sure they can update their information. Again, they have to update everything else with us. If they make a change with their board, their name, a merger, there's a requirement already within our code that they have to tell us this. But we've kind of dropped the ball of not having this update for their contact information. So we're adding that. The next change is at the bottom of page 5 there in 26.3.122. And this is just, again, an update We're removing the requirement of registered mail and replacing it with certified mail. We send correspondence to insurance companies. The type of correspondence we're sending here is legal documents. Insurance companies have to notify us of certain things within our code, and we have to mail those notifications out. Right now, as the code stands, we have to mail it registered mail. Registered mail is typically something with a value, and it would be insured. Because these are legal documents, we don't feel that's necessary. It's also extremely expensive to have registered mail, so we feel certified mail is absolutely appropriate. We're getting that return receipt, it's certified, going to that insurer, and communicating that legal correspondence. The next change is on page 6, and it is in chapter 9 of our code. Again, this refers to the insurance agents. A couple of years ago, we had a very similar bill, a cleanup bill, and we focused on insurance agents themselves within chapter 9, those changes. And what we updated terms within that bill in 2022, and we updated the term producer, which is your insurance agent, to licensee. And the reason we updated that is because this chapter 9 refers not only to agents, but also to the adjusters who come to your house and adjust your claims, and other types of licenses. So this was an update to encompass this. In our bill in 2022, we inadvertently missed these two producer terms, so we're just striking those and replacing them with licensee. Again, that's in 26.9.216. Moving on to page 7. Again, we're going back to this original certificate. It's what makes this bill long. I apologize. We're striking through original, and just, again, licensing companies the same. We're just not sending that hard copy. And there are 3 instances of that in chapter 7, or on page 7. In page 8, we're striking through this last sentence. Again, this talks about this hard copy of certificate of authority of this license. This is just removing that requirement. It does not change anything on how we do business or what can be. This specifically says a certificate of insurance can be evidence in any type of hearing or anything like that. We can still make it evidence. We can still certify to that. We're just removing this original requirement again for that hard copy. On page 9 of the bill, we move to chapter 35. This applies to the scope of chapter 35. Chapter 35 is our cancellation and non-renewal requirements for insurance companies. And what this little section does is says, this is what it applies to. There has been some confusion with insurance companies in our policy department. And this actually was a change that was asked by industry to try to clarify between us and industry, saying, when you go and get an auto policy, it's brand new, and they give you a temporary insurance card. Typically, that temporary insurance card is only valid for about 30 days, could be more, could be 45. If you have a temporary insurance card, what this is saying is that it doesn't cancellation and non-renewal requirements don't necessarily apply. So, and what that means is in chapter 35, we have requirements that say, if an insurer is going to cancel somebody, they have to give notice, okay? They have to give 45 days notice to say, we're going to cancel or non-renew your policy, and there's certain timeframes. If you have a 30-day policy, an insurer cannot give you, or just a temporary card, an insurer can't give you 45-day notice, which again is common sense, and that's exactly what it says there, but there seems to be a lot of confusion with the insurers of saying, well, how do I give 45 days notice when I gave a temporary binder for this? So again, it's not changing anything in our code. It's just clarification. It's something that comes up often with insurance companies. Then we move on. The last part of these bills of this bill is repealers. The first repealer is 26.3.113C. And this is exactly what I was talking about, the certificate of authority being property of the department. This section requires the insurer to mail that physical original certificate of authority back to the department. So we're just removing that requirement. If you have a certificate of authority, we don't want it back again. You can keep it. We'll give you a new one and issue it. We're not holding them to that original. The next two repealers are actually related to health insurance, and these two repealers, one is in Chapter 18, which is an individual health insurance, and one is in Chapter 19, which is group health insurance. These were actually brought to us by our domestic health insurer that's located here. And this is a clarifying language. We require currently every health policy if they offer any additional type of benefits, which we call those wellness benefits. I'm sure many of you are aware with wellness benefits, which are not subject to a deductible, right? Maybe you get a free wellness visit from your physician once a year. It could be, a mammogram or services like that maybe aren't subject to a deductible, right? They're for the betterment of these policies. And this law was originally written in 1998, I believe, and wellness benefits were a brand new thing. This was great, and we wanted people to know about them, right? You wanted to know that you had benefits that weren't subject to a deductible, and so we required every single policy that had any sort of wellness benefit to have this disclosure on the policy. Today, wellness benefits are a pretty common thing. Most health insurance policies have them. In fact, in federal law, most of them have the requirement to have those wellness benefits. So this is a number one question we get from insurers. We review all the policies in our office, everything that you see in your homes for your auto, your home, or your health insurance policies, come to us first to make sure that language is compliant with Wyoming law. And the number one question is, why do we have to put this disclosure? And the disclosure is just this policy contains adult wellness benefits. And it's always it's a question from insurance companies. It's a question from insureds or consumers saying, what does this mean? We are not changing the benefits of the policy. We're not changing anything it's still required to have all those benefits spelled out in the policy and clearly communicated to the consumer. We're just removing this disclosure because it causes honestly more confusion than it's really worth. So those are, it probably looks like it's a big paragraph again in Chapter 18 and Chapter 19. But that is what that is required. That's what that's removing. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you for your explanation. Questions from committee? Let me just make sure, was your last name Howard?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And sir, your last name was?
Rude, R-U-D-E.
R-U-D?
R-U-D-E.
Rude, okay. Any questions for Mr. Rude? Okay. Thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate it. Is there any other state agencies or elected officials that would like to testify on this bill? How about people from the public that are not lobbyists? And then last but not least, how about anybody that's a lobbyist that would like to testify? Okay. Matt, is there anybody on Zoom?
Mr. Chairman, there is not.
There is not. Okay.
Just question, Matt, it says 2 participants there. Is that?
Chairman, Representative Brown, that's actually myself and the room.
Oh.
We will hopefully always have at least 2 participants.
Okay.
Yes. We did have one gentleman who joined earlier, but dropped off during conversation on the previous bill.
Okay, so we're at the point where, what is your pleasure? And I'm going to turn things back over to Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So members, on Senate File 52, is there a motion on the bill? Moved by Weber, second by Heft. Members, any discussion, any amendments on Senate File 52? No? Keep a nice, clean, white bill. So do I hear the question being called? Any discussion? Question being called, Matt. Please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a roll call vote on Senate File 52, Insurance Amendments. Representative Brown.
Aye.
Representative Heft.
Aye.
Representative Johnson.
Aye.
Representative Lucas.
Aye.
Representative Webb.
Aye.
Representative Weber.
Aye.
I have an absentee vote from Representative Locke of aye. Representative Knapp notified me of a conflict of interest. He will not vote. And Chairman Knapp, or excuse me, Chairman Yin.
Aye.
Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
Great. We will figure out who will carry this on the floor as well as the last bill. They're both committee bills, and there's still quite a few people from the interim committee that will be able to do it, and if not, I'll handle it. Thank you. And so next on the list, we have, I believe, Senate File 52. Sorry, that's, yeah, yes, my apologies. Heads a little scattered going up and down real quick. So we just disposed of Senate File 52, so we are on Senate File 50, Insurance Holding Company Regulations Amendments. I believe this does come from you guys, so please present the bill.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, again, my name is Jeff Rude, the Insurance Commissioner, along with my deputy, Tana Howard. I apologize now because you just heard the fun, exciting insurance bill, and this is the next one. Senate File 52 was passed unanimously by joint corporations, but obviously we have new members here. And so I'd just like to give a little background to the insurance regulation that applies to this bill. In the United States, insurance regulation is done at the state level. And I think you heard that Wednesday when you were briefed by NCOIL. So our department oversees our domestic insurance companies. New York handles the New York companies. Florida handles the Florida companies. Generally, Wyoming is a business-friendly state. We have fewer, actually significantly fewer insurance regulations than any other state. But there is one area that we're all in agreement on, that we all have the same regulations on. And that is when it comes to financial examinations. And we do that for a couple of very good reasons. First, without consistent state regulation, the federal government will move into this space. And they have tried to do this in the past. And I think NCOIL even might have mentioned that on your briefing Wednesday. The states don't want this, and I know the insurance companies don't want this. And secondly, it just makes good sense for us to have one uniform standard. That way, an insurance company doesn't have to deal with multiple jurisdictions with multiple changes and differences. This way, we're doing the same financial exams, and they're the same everywhere you go. So insurers and the departments of insurance, we've worked to get together to develop these uniform standards. They take years to do. Many meetings, we have input from consumer groups, and we sit down with the big insurers and their representatives, and we come up with these standards. So in many ways, they are self-developed insurance standards that apply to the insurance companies. We've been doing this for decades now, where we come up with these standards. They're called accreditation standards. The Wyoming legislature has passed these agreed upon standards in the past. Our office is accredited because we apply those standards, and other states know that they can trust our work because we're all doing the same thing. And that's really very important because every 4 or 5 years, we actually do an in-depth exam of our domestic insurers. Now, if we didn't have these standards, that would be problematic. The bill before you today has been worked on by the insurers and the states for over 5 years. Currently, 38 states have adopted these standards so far, and the rest of the states are here this year trying to get it passed. So just a quick example of how this would work. We have a Wyoming insurer. They actually are from over the hill. They sell policies in Wyoming. They sell policies in the state to our north. They sell policies in the state to our south. You will probably hear from them when we're done talking. If we did not adopt these standards or we didn't apply to them, those other states to the north and to the south would have to also examine them. So instead of being subject to one exam, they would be subject to multiple exams. These cost money, they take time. Ultimately, these costs are going to be passed on to the consumers, and it's really difficult for the industry to have to deal with multiple exams. And just briefly, the reason we do these exams, our job is to ensure a healthy insurance market. We have to ensure that these companies have sufficient funds to pay claims. And that's what our other role is to protect consumers. Consumers need to know that there's money backing these companies to pay claims and that they're solvent. So we're asking to amend the insurance code dealing with the holding company. The background here is Wyoming has adopted the initial Holding Company Act back in 1991. There were amendments in 2013. There were additional amendments in 2019. And we have these amendments before you today. These have been worked on with industry, developed over the last 5 or 6 years. Just by way of explanation, a holding company is really just a group of companies that have a relationship with one another. Think of, say, 5 companies where one is a parent company and there's some subsidiary companies within there. The parent company might have some control over those subsidiaries. So what we're doing here is the department needs to not only look at an insurance company, we also need to look at those other companies within that holding company act, or that holding company group that have this relationship with them. So we just need to see what money's going in and out involved with those other companies. Because the insurance companies are so intimately involved with these other companies in this group, we have to be aware of what's going on and ensure that the money is going to be there. Ultimately, what we want to be sure of is that, for example, if there's 5 companies and one of them is an insurance company, insurance companies are unique. They have more liquidity. If you were a baker, you wouldn't need the liquidity of an insurance company. Bakers don't pay claims. And so they have to have this money available. We need to be sure that these other companies in this holding company group aren't siphoning off the money from the insurer to pay for, bonuses to their CEOs or spending it in some other ways and spending down the reserves of that insurance company. We also need to protect U.S. companies. I don't foresee this occurring in Wyoming, but overall, you can have a holding company involving companies from Europe or Asia that have a U.S. insurance company within. And so our role is to ensure that that U.S. insurance company, those assets are protected and that they're going to be there to pay U.S. consumers when they make a claim. So that really brings us to the bill that's before you. These financial standards are complex. The language, it's detailed, it's awkward, but this language has been hammered out between the insurers and the departments of insurance. And with that, I'll answer questions now. I will give you I can go through the bill at a 30,000-foot level. And if you want a deeper dive, I'll be happy to do that too.
Any questions for the Department of Insurance? I have one. Commissioner, so it's a blue copy. Could you go over what the changes were from the other side?
Mr. Chairman, with this engrossed version, I actually had that, the last thing I was going to touch on was, it was fascinating because in the interim, we had the interim committee disliked a certain section and they thought we should break it out differently. And so we did some research, we went to other states and we broke it out differently. And then it went to the Senate side, they put it all back together again. There's no substantive changes. We're not concerned with any of the changes that the Senate made.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Stay close, just in case. But any other agencies, elected officials want to chat? Members of the public? We'll go with registered lobbyists. Fill all the chairs. We'll just go one at a time. Whoever wants to go first, feel free to grab the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Kristen Lee, and I represent the American Council of Life Insurers. And the American Council of Life Insurers is an association with approximately 300 members of companies that sell life insurance. And we participate in developing these model legislation. So I'll make it very quick and brief. We support this today. and we appreciate your attention to it. And we agree with the testimony presented by Commissioner Rude. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Lee? Thank you, Ms. Lee. Ms. Wilkinson, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Catherine Wilkinson here on behalf of American Property Casualty Insurance Association, also standing in support of this bill because it is an accreditation standard. Mr. Chairman, we are also fine with the amendments. I will tell you, I did spend an hour trying to figure out what they did before calling the sponsor, and it is just renumbering and reordering of that. So I can also affirm that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, continue.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Raymond Red, representing Blue Cross Blue Shield of Wyoming. We're also in concurrence with this bill and agreement that it will be good for the state of Wyoming. We, as an insurance company, at times need to work with other industries outside of Wyoming, and having the same holding company requirements for this accreditation piece is very important so that the insurance departments can work together and ensure that we're following the same rules in each state. And we have agreements with other blue plans across the country from time to time. And what this does is it allows those, the rules in their state or our state to be in alignment so that we can have an affiliated company or something like that. And what those do is they serve the people in Wyoming by providing additional services that might not be able to be provided in Wyoming. And so enabling this statute to go through and these changes will make that process a lot more simple and streamlined, and also provide a lot of clarity as to what the requirements will be. Thank you.
Any questions from Mr. Red? Thank you. Next.
Sorry about that. Mr. Chairman, Dan Bleak, Vice President Analytics with Mountain West Farm Bureau Mutual Insurance Company and 360 Insurance Company. Our company is the company from over the hill that Commissioner Rude was referring to. We're the #2 overall auto, home, farm and ranch, and commercial insurer in the state of Wyoming. #1 in farm and ranch. We also operate in Montana, and then we have a subsidiary company, 360 Insurance Company, that operates in Colorado. So we are subject to 3 different states. We stand in support of this bill as well, mainly because of the accreditation standards and the ability for the Wyoming Insurance Department to conduct our financial exam, which we're currently going through that process. And it is a lengthy process. It is an expensive one for companies and the department to do. So it's an incredible benefit to us and ultimately to our policyholders for us to be able to do that just with the Wyoming Insurance Department, and then Montana and Colorado to be able to rely upon those findings. And with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Bleak with the K?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Bleak, any questions? Okay, well, thank you guys. Is there anyone else here who would like to testify on Senate File 50? If not, we will close public comment. Members, what's your pleasure? Bill. Moved. Is there a second? Second. So moved by Representative Webb, seconded by Representative Lucas. Any discussion on Senate File 50? Okay. Do I hear the question? Question being called. Mr. Petrie, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a roll call vote on Senate File number 50, Insurance Holding Company Regulations Amendments. Representative Brown?
Aye.
Representative Heft?
Aye.
Representative Johnson?
Aye.
Representative Lucas?
Aye.
Representative Webb?
Aye.
Representative Weber?
Aye.
Representative Locke submitted an aye vote in absentee form. And Representative Knapp declared a conflict. Chairman Yin.
Aye.
Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Members, so we actually do have, these are 3 committee bills. I will ask to see if there are any volunteers for any of the committee bills, if they want to take it, and then we can have members take back up. Great, okay. Any other volunteers for either of the Other bills? Okay. All right. I will talk with Chairman Knapp to see what we will do with them. Members, we are now on Senate File 59 for consideration. Is there any presenter for Senate File 59? It seems like there is not. Let me pull up my minutes from the interim, and then maybe I can present them. Oh, we have the Secretary of State. We are on Senate File 59. If are you? We have until 2 o'clock. So if you would like to present the bill, I mean it's a short bill. We could dispose of it pretty quickly, I think. Mr. Secretary, if you would like, we can carry it over. It's up to you.
I have no issue carrying it.
You'd be okay with carrying it over? Yeah. All right, members, if you're open to the extra 15 minutes, 12 minutes?
Do it.
Oh, it sounds like the committee would like to do it, so please, Mr. Secretary.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Before you now is Senate File 59, Registered Agents Release of Records. So this bill came out of the Business Fraud Working Group during the 2024 interim. This was the one thing that came out of the working group which our office really did not request. Now, this came out of assessors and treasurers wanting to be able to obtain the information, the records that we hold on file that typically is only given in certain instances. So it amends 17-28-108. The Secretary of State may release any such confidential information only pursuant to court-ordered subpoena to a bona fide law enforcement agency for use in a criminal investigation, and then you have the new language, or upon written application to a county assessor or county treasurer to obtain the information for official business. Any records obtained by a county assessor or county treasurer pursuant to this subsection shall be held confidential, provided that the county assessor or county treasurer may release such confidential information only pursuant to a court-ordered subpoena or to a bona fide law enforcement agency for use in a criminal investigation. Now, with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, I go ahead and maybe turn it over to Mr. Rubino to talk a little bit about our current practice on these records and how this would change it and the footing that this would place county assessors and treasurers in. And then I'd like to go into my testimony if it's possible. I think it would help in the presentation.
Sounds fine.
Thank you.
Mr. Rubino, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Rubino. I'm the Policy Director and Counsel with the Secretary of State's Office. As we discussed numerous times throughout the interim, what you have under the Commercial Registered Agent Act is CRAs, if they represent as registered agents 10 or more entities, they keep certain, they're required to keep certain information, contact information, namely, that is otherwise not on publicly available business filings with the Secretary of State's office. What you have is, we have in our database system, we have all of the filings that are publicly available, which is pretty much everything with the exception of valuation assessment worksheets. So how business entities that are registered to do business in the state of Wyoming, how they calculate the assets that they have in Wyoming, which determines how much their annual report taxation payments are to the state of Wyoming. That being said, commercial registered agents are required to keep certain contact information with their office for the entities that they represent. A commercial registered agent and any registered agent, you know, one of their big things that they have to do, the biggest thing that they have to do is they have to accept service of process on behalf of the entities that they represent. And so in order to do so, they have to have the contact information in their possession to be able to effectuate that service of process when they're served with a lawsuit or a subpoena or things like that. That information is not filed with our office. However, our office, under existing law, has the statutory authority to audit commercial registered agents, both to to ensure that the commercial registered agents are serving the proper role as commercial registered agents, that they are there to accept in person service of process on behalf of the entities they represent, as well as keep the information that is required by law, the contact information for the entities that they represent. While this is not available publicly, this is something that our agency has. And in the existing statute in 1728-108, this discusses that the records that are obtained, they can be audited by our office, and that when we audit those, we may also release those, as of right now, so this is existing language, this confidential information pursuant to really two things. One is a court-ordered subpoena, and two is to a bona fide law enforcement agency for use in a criminal investigation. So one is for a subpoena, one is for a law enforcement agency, but only if they're using it for a criminal investigation. What this bill does is this opens it up, and there was a pretty vibrant discussion with our office and with the committee throughout the interim, as well as some of the county officers and the registered agents, both in the Business Fraud Working Group and in the committee meetings in both Evanston in August, as well as Cheyenne in October, about the playing field that you have on one hand, a court-ordered subpoena requirement and a law enforcement agency for use in a criminal investigation, and then opening this up now to county officers. I think one of the things that came out of the October Cheyenne interim meeting was that there were a couple of additional sideboards that were put up to ensure that the information was to be obtained from our office, not directly from the commercial registered agent, which our office had several concerns that would raise a couple of due process concerns, but also raise a couple of concerns about upending what we have right now with our agency really being the clearinghouse. And then also what happens with those records once they're obtained. Needing to be used for not any purpose, but the official government purpose for which they're obtaining the records, and B, how those records are treated. And so the language that came out of that is really what we have before us today. So it was an evolving discussion throughout the interim, and I think with that, I'll just turn it back over to the Secretary.
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go ahead and move into testimony. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State, and to my left is Joe Rubino, our Policy Director and Counsel. I do appreciate this bill. That our huge concerns initially were, you remember our July meeting in Evanston, the way this read originally, I mean, if you were on the board of a cemetery district, I think you could have gotten this confidential information. I mean, it was so broadly written, and it did, throughout the interim and the process, get better. I still think, though, I have major concerns with this bill just facially, even though I think if you're going to do it, probably it's written in the proper way to do it currently. I just think putting county assessors and county treasurers on the same footing as a bona fide law enforcement agency when the information they're receiving is for use in a criminal investigation, I just don't know if policy-wise that's the right choice. Or, you have a subpoena. Of course you're going to comply with that. I'm not sure that's the right policy choice. I understand why the county assessors and treasurers think that this may be useful to them, but I also think that this could hurt our collaboration. I mean, you remember from the Lander meeting in April, Mr. Chairman, I think, or maybe it was May, Assessor Berg came in and noted all these instances where she truly felt that businesses were using addresses that they were not appropriate. And out of that meeting, we sent a letter to the county assessors and the county treasurers saying, look, it's very concerning to me that they believed that there was fraud occurring that had not been reported to our office. And I notified them at the start of our term that we had really ramped up our usage of the statute, allowing us to dissolve entities that had filed fraudulent information with our office, which really, we don't have many records of it being used by our predecessors, and that we had ramped that up. And the minute you see fraud, you need to report that to our office. Now, since then, I talked to our business director about this. We've reported many times to this committee. We've done over 60 dissolutions with this procedure. I asked him how many were initiated by a county assessor or treasurer, either completing the form that we asked them to complete, or referring someone to complete the form who say their address is being used inappropriately. And he told me one that he knew of, and he was very confident it was under 5. And in this meeting last year, it made it appear that there were thousands that were problematic. And maybe there are, but the individuals who have that information need to be telling our office where they think those are. And then if they can't fill out the paperwork, if they're uncomfortable filling out the paperwork, then they need to ask and at least refer the owner of that address to us to see if they want to fill out the paperwork to attest that this business registered at their address is not appropriate. And so I just think that this may discourage that collaboration. Granted, it's something we need to continue to work on. And I'm just not there on this bill. I think attacking fraud is really important, but this one, I'm not sure it really effectuates what we're hoping to achieve. That being said, I'm sure there's some county assessors and treasurers that would probably online that are going to counter me. So definitely want to hear from them. I just wanted to get my viewpoint on where we're at. And I think just putting them on par with a subpoena or a bona fide law enforcement agency for use in a criminal investigation, I just think we either need to build another carve-out maybe, which is more narrowly tailored, rather than writing it into that statute, putting them on par with them. Granted, I do think around the edges we worked on that a little bit, but thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. Any questions for the Secretary? We'll go with Representative Gray. I'm Brown, sorry, Secretary.
Oh, it's all right,
Representative
it's all
Brown,
right.
please.
I love my time I love serving with you, and the whole house was great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, hearing your concerns, do you think this would be a better thing taken up in the interim?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this was taken up in the interim. I think that we did get some sideboards on this that I was happy with. You could build a whole other subsection. I think what is before you is a policy choice. Are we going to put county assessors and treasurers on the same par as subpoenas or bona fide law enforcement agencies conducting a criminal investigation? Not just this is a criminal. I do think around the edges we got the language probably right. I was just talking out loud. I'm like, maybe we should just build another subsection for this. That was another way to approach it. But I think it's just sort of a up or down decision point at this point. And I have concerns. I've always had concerns with the up or down decision point. That being said, I've tried to work the process, get it worded better, and I think we're pretty much there. I wanted to do that. I think that's important, and we did that in the interim. But this is the one from the Business Fraud Working Group that we did not request because I'm just not as there on the concept. But obviously, we got to attack fraud. But I've never really heard the compelling interest on how this is going to advance that attack on fraud. So, thank you.
Any follow-up, Representative Brown? No? Representative Lucas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'm looking at page 2, line 7, and I see official business. It says that the assessor or county treasurer obtains information for official business. Doesn't say a criminal investigation or a fraud investigation, just official business. And to me, that could be like anything that they do in the routine course of their jobs. And so I'm just wondering if that language is sufficient for what you are looking for.
Mr. Secretary,
Thank you,
please.
Mr. Chairman. Representative Lucas. I have a little bit of concerns on official business as whether, what that means. I think that it's better than where we started out at. It was totally open-ended. And this is where we kind of ended up. I don't think it's defined. I think it's more of a Black's Law Dictionary kind of definition. And so, yeah, I think that could be viewed as a little bit open-ended. Thank you.
Any other questions for the secretary? So members, it is 2:03. We are due back in the chamber, so I'm going to hold consideration for this open. I will let Chairman Knapp know that you can still be in the hot seat if you'd like at the beginning of the next meeting, and that we will hopefully hear from the treasurers and assessors at the next meeting. Thank you, and with that, the meeting is adjourned.